Nick Kyrgios appears to be rightfully headed for another suspension from the men's tennis tour. He could also go deep, very deep, at this United States Open. That puts the sport in an awkward position, but then Kyrgios is constantly tying his profession and himself into knots as he flickers between brilliant and boorish, compassionate and clueless. No man outside the big three of Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer generates as much buzz. You can argue that no man, not even one of the big three, generates as much interest from the younger fans tennis desperately needs to reach if it is to remain a part of everyone's screen time. But Kyrgios, 24, also regularly attacks the game at which he intermittently excels. His violations of the game's unwritten codes, showing up opponents with trick shots or forehand blasts at their midsections, as he did with Nadal at Wimbledon this year, can be fine theater. Tennis needs contrasts in personalities. But Kyrgios is also a serial rule breaker, and his on-court behavior often disrespects not just players, officials, and his own courtside entourage, but also the sport itself. The pattern, and it is undeniably a pattern, has gone on long enough, resurfacing this month in Cincinnati and again on Tuesday night with an outburst in a news conference after he won his opening match at the US Open. Kyrgios deserves to be suspended again, for the second time in his career, and he is likely to be suspended again despite all his box office and YouTube appeal. So why has no action been taken yet? The explanation is partly about fairness and due process. It takes time to gather information and reach definitive judgment. But the delay is also about professional tennis's divided governance. For a niche sport, albeit a global one, it has a surplus of jurisdictions and chief executives. Kyrgios is now facing 2 investigations by the Association of Tennis Professionals, either of which could lead to a lengthy suspension if he is found to have committed a major offense under the tour's code of conduct. The first investigation stems from his behavior during a second-round loss at the Western and Southern Open on August 14. He was fined a record sum for the men's tour, $113,000, for a series of offenses that included unsportsmanlike conduct, verbal abuse of the chair umpire, Fergus Murphy, an audible obscenity and leaving the court without authorization during the match. During that break off court, he smashed 2 rackets, and at the conclusion of the match, which was won by Karen Kaykanov, Kyrgios appeared to spit in Murphy's general direction. The ATP announced the fines and a major offense investigation the next day but has yet to formally hear Kyrgios's version of events. Knowing that the process could take time, the ATP decided to wait until Kyrgios was eliminated from the US Open, so he could focus on the tournament at hand. He was thus free to play the US Open without the US Open having to debate whether it would respect a ban by the ATP Tour, a separate organization with separate officials. But then late on Tuesday night, after a brilliant performance and some more misbehavior in his straight sets victory over Steve Johnson, Kyrgios was asked at a news conference whether the hefty fine from the Ohio tournament had affected him. "Not at all," he said. "The ATP is pretty corrupt anyway, so I'm not fussed about it at all." Considering the cloud Kyrgios was already under, it was a rash statement, and the ATP reacted quickly on Wednesday. It's moved in, building strong ties with local forces that benefit from its patronage while expanding its influence and amplifying the threat to Israel. Iran pioneered this approach by building Hezbollah into Lebanon's most formidable military force, with tens of thousands of trained fighters and an arsenal believed to contain more than 100,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. More recently, Iran has strengthened its regional network by providing arms and expertise to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, militias in Iraq and pro-government forces in Syria. Iran has also strengthened cooperation between its allies. Hezbollah operatives from Lebanon have trained fighters in Iraq and Yemen and sent aid to Palestinian jihadist movements, and Iran has airlifted thousands of militiamen from Iraq and elsewhere into Syria to help President Bashar al-Assad defeat a rebellion there. The lives of the 2 militants killed by the Israeli strike in Syria over the weekend illustrate the borderless nature of the Iranian network. The fighters, Hassan Zabib and Yasser Dayer, grew up in Lebanon, studied aviation engineering in Iran and returned to Lebanon to work with Hezbollah, according to the Lebanese news media. Iran calls its regional network the Axis of Resistance. While its members operate with significant autonomy in their own countries, they share the broader goal of combating American, Israeli, and Saudi influence in the Middle East. Having militarized allies across the region also serves as a deterrent against Israeli and American strikes on Iran, since any such attacks could elicit violent responses elsewhere. Israel's efforts to hinder Iranian expansion in recent years have focused largely on Syria, where Israel has carried out more than 200 airstrikes since early 2017 on suspected weapons convoys, bases, and other sites associated with the Iranian war effort. Israel mostly avoided killing Hezbollah fighters in Syria and attacking inside Lebanon, which could have provoked counterstrikes. This led to an unwritten understanding, often called the rules of the game, about where and how their conflict would and would not play out. The attacks last weekend appeared to break the rules by killing 2 Hezbollah fighters in Syria and reaching into the heart of a Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut. Raising temperatures further are brash public statements on both sides, which seem intended as much for domestic audiences as for each other. Israel's military has taken to taunting its adversaries on social media. After the airstrike in Syria, it ridiculed General Soleimani. On Tuesday, it launched a Twitter account in Persian to try to undermine him with the Iranian public. Addressing his followers over the weekend, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, vowed to retaliate, shouting his determination to prevent attacks in Lebanon from becoming frequent. "We in the Islamic resistance, we will not allow for this type of path, no matter the cost," he said. He did not say how or when his forces would respond. "I suggest to Nasrallah to calm down," Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel responded mockingly on Tuesday. "Israel knows how to defend itself and to pay back its enemies. I say the same to Qasem Soleimani, be careful with your words and even more so with your actions." Some analysts suggested that the approaching Israeli election encouraged Mr. Netanyahu's tough stance, while Mr. Nasrallah also could not appear to be weak at a time when American sanctions have hurt his group's finances. Talal Atrisi, a sociologist who studies Hezbollah at Lebanese University, said he expected the group to retaliate against Israel to prevent attacks in Lebanon from becoming commonplace. Alluding to Israel's national elections on September 17, he added, "There are elections, and Netanyahu needs to show that he is protecting Israel, but if there is no response, he'll keep doing it. It won't just be the election. It will become a new strategy." Officials and analysts said the recent uptick in strikes, and their spread into Iraq and Lebanon, came in response to adjustments to Iran's strategy. One involved General Soleimani's efforts to maintain supply lines for shipments of arms and equipment from Iran. Until about a year ago, according to a senior Middle Eastern intelligence official, Iran used unmarked or Iranian commercial planes flying into the Damascus airport to reach Hezbollah or Quds force units in Syria. But repeated Israeli airstrikes drove Iran to reroute supplies through airfields in northern Syria instead. When Israel struck those fields, too, General Soleimani moved to set up a land route. That route goes from Iran through Iraq, where drivers and vehicles are often changed to elude surveillance, before crossing into northern Syria. The Israeli attack on July 19 at Emirli Base, north of Baghdad, struck a shipment of guided missiles bound for Syria. It was the first time Israel had carried out an airstrike in Iraq since it destroyed a nuclear reactor near Baghdad in 1981, when Saddam Hussein was in power. Israel has been working to prevent Hezbollah from manufacturing its own precision-guided missiles since early 2017, using a combination of disclosures, warnings, and threats, Israeli analysts say. Prevented from military action by its understanding with Hezbollah and a desire to avoid war, Israel at first tried to weaponize its intelligence gathering, hoping that exposing Hezbollah's missile project as a threat to regional security would create international pressure to quash it. That approach culminated in a speech by Mr. Netanyahu to the United Nations last September, in which he showed aerial photos of what he said were 3 factories for precision-guided missiles in downtown Beirut. Ophek Remer, a former Israeli military intelligence officer who writes frequently on national security, called the public relations tactic coercive disclosure. But he said that phase appeared to have ended with Sunday's blast in Beirut. He cautioned that the explosion in Beirut still appeared well short of an all-out Israeli attempt to stop Hezbollah's precision-guided missile project by military means. "We're still in the signaling business, as I see it," Mr. Remer said. "We're not really going head-on against this project. But it's also signaling to the international community, either we take action, and you don't know where that leads, or you come in and try to pull strings and influence the Lebanese government, Hezbollah by proxy, or even Iran."